Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive alien ships that had just appeared on his screen. The bridge of the New Horizons fell silent as everyone watched the three dark vessels move closer. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built, and they looked like they were made for war. "Sir, they're sending us a message," said Lieutenant Alex Rodriguez from his station. His hands shook slightly as he worked the controls. Jake nodded. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and a creature appeared that made several crew members gasp. It looked like a giant lizard walking on two legs, covered in dark scales, and wearing some kind of armor. Its yellow eyes stared directly at Jake through the screen. "Primitive species," the alien spoke in perfect English, though its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am Commander Thakix of the Vorthak Empire. You will surrender your vessel and submit to galactic law. Resistance will result in your destruction." Dr. Lisa Carter, who stood behind Jake's chair, whispered, "How does it know our language?" Jake raised his hand for silence. He had spent 20 years in Earth's military before joining the space program, and he knew a bully when he saw one. "Commander Thax, I'm Captain Morrison of the human vessel New Horizons. We're explorers, not warriors. We'd be happy to talk about trade or friendship, but we won't surrender to anyone." The alien's eyes narrowed. "You do not understand. For 2,000 years, the galaxy has followed the same rules. New species must prove their worth or accept their place as servants. There is no other choice." "Well," Jake said with a small smile, "I guess we'll have to be the first to try something different." The alien commander made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like a growl. "Foolish creatures. You have 1 hour to reconsider. If you do not surrender, we will teach you why the galaxy follows our rules." The screen went dark. Jake turned to his crew, seeing fear and uncertainty on their faces. These were good people, scientists and explorers who had signed up to discover new worlds, not fight alien battles. "Sir," Alex said quietly, "our weapons won't even scratch those ships. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But Lisa, what did you notice about that alien?" Dr. Carter thought for a moment. "He seemed surprised when you refused. Like it had never happened before." "Exactly. Alex, start running combat simulations, but not the standard ones. I want you to think about what we can do that they won't expect. Karen, get on the radio and warn Earth about what's happening out here." Ambassador Karen Walsh nodded and hurried to her station. She had been chosen for this mission because she could think fast under pressure, and right now, that skill might save all their lives. The hour passed quickly. When the alien ships moved into attack position, Jake felt his heart pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "All hands prepare for combat. Remember, we're not trying to win. We're trying to survive long enough to teach these bullies that humans don't give up easily." The first blast hit their ship like a giant hammer. The lights flickered, and Jake felt the floor shake under his feet. Damage reports came in from all over the ship. "Hull breach on Deck 7, someone called out. "Engine power down to 60%. Another hit rocked the ship. Any normal crew would have been dead or surrendering by now, but Jake's people kept working. Engineers rushed to fix damaged systems. The medical team moved wounded crew members to safety. Everyone did their job, even as explosions shook the ship around them. "Alex, give me something," Jake called out. "Sir, I've been watching their attack patterns. They're following some kind of plan, like a dance they've done 1,000 times before. What if we don't dance with them?" "Do it." Alex's hands flew over his controls. Instead of trying to match the aliens move for move, he made the New Horizons do something completely unexpected. The ship suddenly spun around and flew straight at the largest alien vessel, firing everything they had. The alien commander's voice came through the radio, sounding confused and angry. "What are you doing? This is not proper combat behavior." Jake grabbed the microphone. "Sorry, Commander, nobody gave us the rule book." The human ship was smaller and faster than the alien vessels. By flying in crazy patterns and doing things no sane pilot would try, Alex managed to avoid most of their shots. The New Horizons couldn't hurt the alien ships much, but it could confuse them. "They're trying to surround us," Alex reported. but they're moving like they expect us to follow some kind of plan. Then let's keep disappointing them, Jake said. For 3 hours, the battle continued. The New Horizons should have been destroyed in the first 10 minutes. But every time the aliens thought they had the human ship trapped, it did something impossible and slipped away. Finally, Jake saw his chance. The alien ships had spread out to catch his vessel, leaving a gap between them. Alex, full-powered engines, we're leaving. Sir, the engines are barely working. Then we'll make them work. Lisa, start sending out everything we learned about these aliens. If we don't make it home, someone needs to know what's out here. The New Horizons limped away from the battle, trailing smoke and sparks. The alien ships could have followed and finished them off, but they didn't. They just sat there, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. Back on the alien flagship, Commander Thack stared at his tactical display. In 2,000 years of galactic warfare, he had never seen anything like what the humans had. Just done. They fought without following any rules he understood. They kept going when any reasonable species would have surrendered. And somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Sir, his aide asked nervously, should we pursue them? Thax was quiet for a long time. No. Let them go. But send word to the Empire. Tell them we have encountered something new, something that might change everything. As the New Horizons disappeared into hyperspace, heading home with its incredible story, neither the humans nor the aliens realized that this single battle had just started a revolution that would transform the entire galaxy. The old rules were about to be rewritten, and it would all begin with one simple idea that humans refuse to abandon. There's always another way. General Patricia Hayes stood in the command center on Mars, watching the reports come in from the outer colonies. 6 months had passed since Captain Morrison's encounter with the aliens, and now the Vorthak Empire was coming in force. 50 warships were heading toward human space, and Earth's entire fleet could barely match 3 of them. General, the colony on Kepler 442 is requesting evacuation, reported her aide, Lieutenant Sophie Turner. They say the alien fleet will reach them in 2 days. Patricia shook her head. Tell them to stay put. Running won't help us now. She had spent her entire career studying military history, and she knew that conventional warfare against the Vorthak would be suicide. But humans had one advantage that no computer simulation could measure. They were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Get me Commander Phillips, she ordered. Commander Ryan Phillips appeared on the main screen from his base on Europa. Behind him, Patricia could see workers loading mining equipment onto cargo ships. Ryan had been Earth's specialist in fighting impossible battles, and now humanity needed every trick he had ever learned. Ryan, please tell me you have good news, Patricia said. Depends on how you define good, Ryan replied with a grin. The colonists at Kepler 442 aren't evacuating, but they're not just sitting there waiting to die either. Remember Dr. Clark's crazy ideas about civilian technology? Dr. Ben Clark had been laughed out of 3 military academies for suggesting that mining lasers could be turned into weapons and cargo ships could become bombers. Now those crazy ideas might be humanity's only hope. The miners on Kepler have been busy, Ryan continued. They've turned their asteroid processing station into the biggest gun platform you've ever seen, and the cargo haulers are loading up with explosive ore. If the Vorthak want that colony, they're going to have to fight for it. Patricia felt a spark of hope. What about the other colonies? Same story everywhere. Nobody's running. The farmers on New Iowa are turning their crop dusters into fighter planes. The research station at Wolf 359 has figured out how to make their communications array into a jamming weapon. It's like the whole human race decided to go crazy at the same time. 3 days later, the Vorthak fleet reached Kepler 442. Commander Tkex led the attack personally, expecting an easy victory that would serve as an example to the rest of humanity. The colony had no military ships, no proper weapons, and fewer than 10,000 people. By every rule of galactic warfare, they should surrender immediately. Instead, the mining station opened fire with lasers designed to cut through asteroids. The cargo ships came at the Vorthak vessels like guided missiles, exploding when they got close enough to do damage, and the colonists sent a message that made Thax's blood run cold. Come and take it. Sir, this is not standard colonial defense. his tactical officer reported. "They're using industrial equipment as weapons. Our combat computers don't know how to respond to mining lasers." Thax watched in amazement as a simple cargo hauler rammed itself into one of his escort ships. The explosion barely scratched the alien vessel's armor, but it left a mark. And in 2,000 years of conquest, the Vorthak had never been marked by civilians using mining equipment. "Destroy them all," Thax ordered. "Make an example that the rest of humanity will understand." But the battle didn't go as planned. Every time the Vorthak ships moved to attack the colony, more cargo haulers appeared from the asteroid belt, forcing them to defend themselves. The mining station kept firing, not doing much damage but never stopping, and the colonists refused to surrender, even when half their buildings were burning. It took the Vorthak 3 days to capture Kepler 442, and by then, the story had spread across human space. The colonists had held off 50 warships for 3 days using nothing but mining equipment and stubbornness. Suddenly, every human colony in the galaxy was asking the same question. If farmers and miners could fight the Vorthak Empire, what could real soldiers do? Commander Phillips provided the answer at the Battle of New Geneva. When the Vorthak fleet arrived expecting another easy conquest, they found the colony apparently defenseless. No orbital stations, no visible weapons, just a few cargo ships, moving between the planet and its moons. "Sir, should we demand surrender?" asked Thax's aide. "No," Thax replied. "After Kepler, we destroy first and ask questions later." The Vorthak ships moved into attack formation, their weapons charging for a devastating first strike. That's when Philip sprang his trap. The cargo ships were actually converted military vessels hiding in plain sight. The empty moons were full of missile silos, and the defenseless colony had been preparing for this battle for months. Now, Phillips whispered into his radio, the hidden missile batteries opened fire from 6 different moons. The disguised warships dropped there, fake cargo containers and revealed military-grade weapons. And from the planet's surface, converted passenger shuttles launched carrying volunteers who were willing to ram alien ships if necessary. The battle lasted 12 hours. When it was over, the Vorthak had lost 8 ships and had to retreat. Phillips had lost 3 converted vessels and 50 volunteers, but he had proven something important. Humans could win. News of the victory spread even faster than the defeat at Kepler. Across the galaxy, other species started paying attention to the war they had expected to last only a few weeks. The Nexari Collective sent observers to study human, primitive but effective tactics. The Etherian Council tried to understand how humans could fight so effectively without psychic coordination. Even the merchant clans of Zelos began wondering if there might be profit in backing the underdogs. But the most important reaction came from younger members of the major galactic powers. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing someone fight the established order and win. Military academies across Vorthak space began studying human battles, not to learn how to defeat humans, but to understand how they thought. General Hayes watched the intelligence reports with growing amazement. The war was spreading beyond anything she had planned. Human tactics were being copied by rebel groups in 3 different star systems. Young Vorthak officers were questioning their traditional battle doctrines, and somehow, impossibly, the species that was supposed to be conquered was teaching the galaxy a new way to fight. "General," Sophie Turner reported, "we're getting communication requests from all over the galaxy. Species we've never heard of want to know how we're doing this." Patricia smiled. "Tell them the truth. We're not following the rules because nobody ever gave us a copy of the rulebook." The war that was supposed to prove Vorthak supremacy had become something else entirely. It was becoming a lesson that the entire galaxy was learning. There's always another way to fight, another way to think, another way to survive. And sometimes the best way to win is to refuse to lose. On his flagship, Commander Thax stared at the tactical reports and wondered what his empire had gotten itself into. The humans were supposed to be primitives, easily conquered and quickly forgotten. Instead, they were rewriting the rules of warfare, and the rest of the galaxy was taking notes. The war was far from over, but already, Thax could see that victory would cost more than anyone had imagined. The humans weren't just fighting for their colonies. They were fighting for the right to be different, and somehow they were winning. Director Matt Johnson sat in his office on Luna, reading reports that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The war with the Vorthak had officially ended in a draw, but the real story was just beginning. Across the galaxy, the careful balance of power that had kept peace for 2,000 years was starting to crack. "Sir, you need to see this," said his assistant, bringing in another stack of coded messages. "We've got 3 more species asking for secret meetings this week." Matt rubbed his tired eyes. When he had taken the job as head of Human Intelligence Services, he had expected to spend his time watching for alien threats. He had never imagined that other species would be coming to humans for help. "What do they want this time?" he asked. "The Zelos merchants want to learn about flexible trade agreements. The young Nexari scientists are asking about creative engineering solutions. And there's a group from the Etherian Council that wants to understand how humans think without psychic coordination." Matt shook his head in amazement. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations were secretly studying humanity, trying to understand how a species with primitive technology and no unified government had fought the Vorthak Empire to a standstill. Meanwhile, Captain Nina Foster was discovering just how much the galaxy had changed during her latest exploration mission. The Trailblazer had been visiting border systems, mapping new trade routes, and making contact with minor species. What she found there surprised her. "Captain, you need to hear this," said her communications officer. "I'm picking up chatter from a Vorthak colony ship. They're arguing about battle tactics." Nina listened to the translated conversation with growing amazement. Young Vorthak officers were questioning their traditional methods, suggesting that maybe their elders had been wrong about the proper way to fight. Some were even using human phrases like thinking outside the box and improvised solutions. "Sir, is it just me? Or are these aliens starting to sound like us?" asked her navigator. Before Nina could answer, their sensors detected something that made everyone on the bridge freeze. A massive object was approaching their position, unlike anything in their database. It was perfectly spherical, about the size of a small moon, and it was moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. "All ships in this sector," came a broadcast on all frequencies. "This is an automated message. I am Probe Unit 7749 of the Builder's final survey. All biological life in this galaxy will be cataloged and evaluated. Resistance will be noted and overcome." The probe's voice was calm and emotionless, like a computer reading a shopping list, but its words sent chills through every ship in the sector. Nina immediately sent out an emergency signal. "All stations, this is Captain Foster of the Trailblazer. We have a code black situation. Unknown alien technology, possibly hostile. Requesting immediate assistance." Within hours, ships from across the galaxy were converging on Nina's position, but what amazed her most was who was coming. Vorthak warships flew alongside Nexari research vessels. Etherian Council ships traveled in formation with human destroyers. Even the normally neutral Harmony Federation had sent a diplomatic cruiser. Ambassador Carl Mitchell arrived aboard the Federation ship, looking as confused as everyone else. He had spent months working on the peace treaty that ended the human-Vorthak war, and now he was facing something that made that conflict look like a minor disagreement. "Captain Foster," he said over the radio, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" "Something that makes all our previous problems look small," Nina replied. "This probe thing just scanned our ships and sent back a report that basically said we're all primitive children playing with dangerous toys." The probe had indeed scanned them, and its response was not encouraging. "Galactic civilization level assessment, primitive. Military capability, minimal. Recommendation, immediate intervention to prevent further chaos." Dr. Rachel Stone, who had joined the mission as a scientific observer, was studying the probe's energy readings with growing alarm. "Captain, this thing's technology is centuries ahead of anything we've seen. It's like comparing a wooden club to a nuclear reactor." "So, what do we do?" Nina asked. "We do what humans always do," came a familiar voice over the radio. It was Captain Morrison, who had arrived aboard a joint human-alien task force. "We find a way to win anyway." The crisis deepened when the probe began demonstrating its capabilities. It effortlessly disabled a Vorthak warship's weapons, then repaired the damage as if showing off. It created a small artificial star just to prove it could, then extinguished it with a thought, and it began sending detailed reports to unknown recipients about the primitive chaos it had discovered in this galaxy. "We need to work together on this," Morrison announced to the assembled fleet. "Human ships, alien ships, it doesn't matter. This thing is a threat to everyone." That's when something unprecedented happened. Commander Thax, the same alien who had tried to conquer humanity months before, contacted Morrison directly. "Human Morrison," the Vorthak commander said. "Your species has shown us new ways to fight. We request your guidance in facing this threat." Similar messages came from other ships. The Nexari wanted human advice on unconventional engineering. The Etherians asked for help with chaotic tactical thinking. The Zelos merchants offered to fund any crazy plan humans could come up with. Director Johnson, monitoring the situation from Luna, realized that humanity was about to face its greatest test. Not a test of strength or technology, but a test of whether they could teach an entire galaxy to think differently. "All human ships," he broadcast, "you are authorized to share any and all tactical information with allied vessels. If we're going to survive this, we need everyone thinking like humans." The idea that had started with one stubborn captain refusing to surrender was about to transform the entire galaxy. Species that had followed the same patterns for millennia were learning to improvise. Ancient enemies were working together, and somewhere in the confusion, a new kind of civilization was being born. The probe watched all of this with mechanical interest, updating its reports about the strange chaos that seemed to be spreading through the local species. Its creators had programmed it to catalog and control primitive civilizations, but they had never encountered anything quite like humanity's infectious unpredictability. As the mixed fleet prepared for whatever was coming next, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same. The rules that had governed civilization for 2,000 years were being rewritten by a species that had learned the most important lesson of all. When the old ways don't work, you have to invent new ones. And sometimes, the best way to teach that lesson is to prove that the impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried yet. Admiral Chris Baker had never expected to command a fleet like this one. Looking at his tactical display, he could see ships from every major power in the galaxy. Sleek Nexari cruisers with their glowing hulls, massive Vorthak battleships bristling with weapons, graceful Etherian vessels that seemed to float on pure thought, and practical human ships that looked like they had been built with spare parts. "Admiral, all ships report ready," announced Commander Elena Davis from her position at the tactical station. She had been chosen to coordinate the mixed fleet because she had a gift for making different species work together, even when they didn't speak the same language or think the same way. "Any word from the probe?" Chris asked. "Still sending reports to its unknown masters," Elena replied. "Our best guess is that it's waiting for instructions on how to deal with us." 3 days had passed since the mysterious probe had arrived, and every attempt to communicate with it had failed. The automated device simply scanned everything it encountered, filed reports, and waited. But its casual display of impossible technology had convinced every species in the galaxy that this was a threat they couldn't face alone. Dr. Paul Graham, the human scientist leading the joint research team, approached Chris with a worried expression. "Admiral, we've figured out what this thing is. The bad news is it's even worse than we thought." Chris felt his stomach drop. "How much worse?" "It's a scout for something called the Builder's Final Survey. Near as we can tell, they're a species that died out millions of years ago, but they left behind these probes to catalog and correct any civilizations that developed after them. The probe thinks our galaxy is too chaotic and needs to be reorganized." "Reorganized? How?" Paul's face was pale. "According to the probe's programming, species that can't follow proper galactic order should be simplified. That usually means wiped out and replaced with something more manageable." Chris turned back to his tactical display, studying the massive sphere that hung in space like a mechanical moon. Every conventional attack they had tried had been absorbed or deflected without the probe even seeming to notice. Vorthak plasma, cannons, Nexari energy beams, Etherian psychic assaults, nothing worked. Elena gathered the ship commanders for a strategy meeting. And make sure our alien friends understand, we're not playing by anyone's rulebook on this one. An hour later, Chris found himself in a conference room filled with the strangest collection of beings the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Thax sat next to Captain Morrison, their old enemies forgotten in the face of a greater threat. Nexari scientists worked alongside human engineers, comparing impossible ideas. Etherian telepaths shared their thoughts with species that had no psychic abilities at all. The probe learns from everything we do, reported Captain Maria Santos, who had been leading reconnaissance missions against the alien device. Every time we attack, it studies our tactics and develops counters. After 3 days, it knows how all of us fight. Then we need to fight in ways it can't study, Chris said. Commander Thax, your people have been using the same battle tactics for centuries. What would happen if you threw all of that away and tried something completely new? The big alien's eyes gleamed with interest. You want us to fight like humans? I want everyone to fight like humans, Chris replied. Random, unpredictable, and too stubborn to quit when things get impossible. What followed was the strangest military planning session in galactic history. Species that had spent millennia perfecting their individual fighting styles began learning to think like the chaotic humans who had started this revolution. Vorthak warriors practiced improvisation. Nexari engineers designed inefficient weapons that did unexpected things. Etherian psychics learned to embrace mental chaos instead of their usual perfect harmony. The breakthrough came when Dr. Graham's mixed research team made an incredible discovery. The probe wasn't just learning from their attacks, it was learning too well. Its artificial intelligence was designed to understand and counter logical, organized threats. But human-style randomness was overloading its processing systems. It's like trying to solve a math problem where the numbers keep changing, Paul explained to the assembled commanders. The probe's computer can handle any predictable threat, but it can't adapt to pure chaos. So we give it chaos, Chris said, with a grin that reminded everyone why humans were considered dangerously unpredictable. The final battle began at dawn, ship time. But instead of a coordinated assault following established military doctrine, Chris ordered something that had never been tried in galactic warfare: organized randomness. Vorthak ships attacked using human-style improvisation, firing weapons in patterns that made no tactical sense. Nexari vessels began jury-rigging impossible combinations of technology, creating weapons that shouldn't work, but somehow did. Etherian psychics projected pure chaotic thought at the probe, filling its sensors with mental static. And human ships did what they did best: the completely unexpected. The probe's response was immediate and terrifying. Its defenses activated, creating energy barriers that could stop any known weapon. Its counterattack struck with precision that should have destroyed half the fleet in the first minute. But something was wrong. The probe's perfect defenses were designed for perfect attacks, and the mixed fleet wasn't giving it anything perfect to defend against. It's working, Elena reported with amazement in her voice. The probe can't predict our next move because we don't know what our next move is going to be. Captain Santos, leading a mixed squadron of human and alien fighters, took advantage of the probe's confusion. All ships follow my lead. We're going to do something really stupid. She led her fighters straight at the probe's most heavily defended section, not in formation, but in a wild, chaotic swarm that looked more like a barroom brawl than a military attack. The probe's defensive systems tried to target them, but the fighters were moving too randomly, changing direction for no reason, attacking and retreating without any pattern. Meanwhile, the capital ships were implementing Chris's most desperate plan. Instead of trying to destroy the probe with superior firepower, they were going to confuse it to death. Every ship in the fleet was broadcasting different signals, attacking different targets, and following completely different tactical plans. Some ships were retreating while others advanced. Some were firing everything they had while others were using mining lasers and improvised weapons. To any military observer, it looked like complete chaos. And that was exactly the point. The probe's artificial intelligence, designed to catalog and counter organized civilizations, began making mistakes. It tried to respond to 17 different attack patterns simultaneously. Its perfect defenses started overlapping and interfering with each other. Its communication systems became overloaded, trying to report on a battle that didn't follow any known rules. Probe systems showing critical errors, Dr. Graham reported. Its computer is basically having a nervous breakdown. But the real victory came when the younger members of the alien crews began improvising on their own. A Vorthak gunner ignored his training and started firing his weapons like a human would. A Nexari engineer bypassed 3 safety systems to create a weapon that her teachers would have called impossible. An Etherian navigator began flying his ship like he was dancing instead of following flight patterns. The galaxy's most disciplined civilizations were learning to embrace the beautiful chaos that humans had brought to the stars. And in doing so, they were becoming something new, something that the probe's ancient programming couldn't understand or counter. When the probe finally shut down, its systems overloaded by input it couldn't process. The silence was almost deafening. The fleet hung in space, surrounded by the debris of shattered preconceptions and rewritten rules. "Admiral," Elena said quietly, "I think we just taught the galaxy how to win by losing their minds." Chris looked around at the mixed fleet, seeing human engineers working with alien technicians, former enemies planning joint patrols, and species that had never cooperated before sharing tactical data. The probe had been defeated, but that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was that the galaxy had learned humanity's greatest secret. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to refuse to accept that it's impossible in the first place. President Linda Rogers stood at the window of her office on Earth, watching the most unusual sight in human history. In the sky above, alien ships from across the galaxy were arriving for the first galactic assembly, and they weren't coming as conquerors or enemies. They were coming as students, eager to learn from the species that had taught them how to rewrite the rules. "Madam President, the Vorthak delegation has arrived," announced her aide. "Commander Thax is requesting a private meeting before the assembly begins." Linda smiled. A year ago, that same alien commander had been trying to conquer humanity. Now, he was one of their closest allies, and his empire had started teaching human tactics in their military academies. "Send him in." Commander Thax entered the office, but he looked different than he had during the war. His armor was less formal, and he carried himself with a relaxed confidence that reminded Linda of human officers. The rigid military bearing that had once defined the Vorthak Empire was giving way to something more flexible. "President Rogers," Thax said in his gravelly voice, "I bring greetings from the Vorthak Empire and a request for continued cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" "Our young warriors are struggling with the new tactics we learned from humans. They understand the theory of improvisation, but they lack practical experience. We request permission to send cadets to train with human forces." Linda had to hide her amazement. The proudest military force in the galaxy was asking humanity to train their soldiers. "Of course, Commander. I'm sure our people will learn as much from yours as you learn from ours." As Thax left, Ambassador Tony Clark arrived with reports from across the galaxy. The changes that had begun with humanity's first contact were accelerating beyond anyone's expectations. "The Nexari Collective has completely reorganized their research programs," Tony reported. "They're now encouraging creative inefficiency in their engineering projects. 3 of their latest inventions were inspired by human jury-rigging techniques." "What about the Etherians?" "They've started teaching chaos meditation alongside their traditional psychic disciplines. Apparently, learning to think like humans has actually enhanced their telepathic abilities." Linda shook her head in wonder. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were rebuilding themselves around human principles, and somehow it was making them stronger, not weaker. The transformation was most visible in the younger generation of aliens. Captain Steve Williams, commanding the first truly integrated human-alien crew aboard the Starship Unity, sent regular reports about his mixed crew that read like science fiction even to the people living it. Our Vorthak tactical officer suggested using a cargo container as a battering ram During yesterday's training exercise, Steve reported in his latest message, our Nexari engineer has learned to swear in 3 human languages when her equipment doesn't work perfectly, and our Etherean navigator has started playing human jazz music during hyperspace jumps because she says it helps her think more creatively. But the most dramatic changes were happening in the economic and political structures of galactic civilization. The Zelos merchant clans, who had built their empire on rigid trade agreements and predictable profit margins, were now experimenting with human-style risk-taking and adaptive contracts. The results were chaotic, unpredictable, and incredibly profitable. Dr. Helen Brooks, who had become the galaxy's leading expert in what she called applied tactical psychology, was studying these changes with fascination and some concern. We've created something unprecedented, she explained to a gathering of human leaders. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species are actively choosing to change their fundamental nature. The question is whether this will lead to a new golden age or complete chaos. Does it matter? Asked President Rogers. Humans never had the luxury of choosing between order and chaos. We learned to make chaos work for us. The answer came during the Galactic Assembly itself. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in Earth's orbital station, but instead of the formal ritualized proceedings that had characterized galactic diplomacy for millennia, the assembly became something entirely new. Debates were passionate, but productive. Species that had never spoken to each other before discovered common interests. Traditional enemies found themselves working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. And through it all, human principles of adaptability and creative problem-solving guided the discussions. The breakthrough moment came when a crisis erupted in the Outer Rim territories. A star was going unstable, threatening to destroy 3 inhabited systems. Under the old galactic order, each species would have waited for the Harmony Federation to organize a formal response, which would have taken months to arrange and might have arrived too late. Instead, the assembly did something unprecedented. They improvised. Within hours, Nexari scientists were working with human engineers to design evacuation ships. Vorthak, military vessels were providing escort services alongside former enemies. Etherean telepaths were coordinating rescue efforts with species they had never worked with before, and Zelos merchants were funding the entire operation without waiting for formal trade agreements. This is impossible, observed the Harmony Federation's senior diplomat, an elderly alien who had spent centuries managing galactic politics. You can't organize an operation this complex without proper procedures and formal protocols. Captain Williams, who was coordinating the rescue fleet from the Unity, overheard the comment and grinned. Sir, that's what they said about humans fighting the Vorthak Empire, and about the coalition that defeated the probe. Sometimes impossible is just another word for nobody's tried it yet. The rescue mission succeeded beyond all expectations. Not only were all 3 threatened systems evacuated safely, but the operation became a template for the new kind of galactic cooperation that was emerging. Species weren't just working together, they were thinking together, combining their unique strengths in ways that made everyone more capable than they had been alone. As President Rogers addressed the closing session of the Galactic Assembly, she looked out at an audience that would have been unimaginable just 2 years before. Former enemies sat together planning joint missions. Ancient rivals were sharing technology and tactics. And species that had been locked in rigid traditions for millennia were embracing change with the enthusiasm of children discovering a new game. We didn't set out to change the galaxy, Linda said to the assembled representatives. We just refused to accept that the way things are was the same as the way things have to be. And somehow, that simple idea has spread to all of you. Commander Thax stood up from the Vorthak delegation. President Rogers, you have given us the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that we could become more than we were. Similar statements came from representatives across the assembly. The Nexari thanked humanity for teaching them that perfection wasn't always the goal. The Ethereans expressed gratitude for learning that chaos could be beautiful. The Zelos merchants were happy to report that unpredictability was extremely profitable. But the most moving moment came when a young alien from a species that had never been allowed to speak at galactic assemblies before stood up and said simply, "You taught us that everyone gets to choose their own rules." As the assembly ended and the delegates prepared to return to their homeworlds, everyone understood that they were going back to a galaxy that would never be the same. The rigid order that had kept peace for 2,000 years was being replaced by something more dynamic, more creative, and infinitely more unpredictable. The fallen armies mentioned in the old prophecies hadn't been defeated by superior force. They had been overcome by the simple realization that their rules were not universal laws, but choices that could be changed. And once that lesson was learned, there was no going back. Captain Williams, preparing for the Unity's next mission with his mixed crew, summed up the transformation best in his final log entry. Humanity came to the galaxy as refugees and outcasts. We're leaving as teachers, having learned the most important lesson of all. The best way to change the world is to prove that change is possible. The galaxy had discovered that through fallen armies and broken rules, a new kind of civilization could rise, one that was messy, unpredictable, and absolutely impossible to conquer, because it refused to stay the same long enough for anyone to figure out how to defeat it. And in the end, that was the most human lesson of all.